which is on the future of cross-industry blockchain technologies. And we have with us Brian Behelendorf, who is the Executive Director, Hyperledger. Well, Brian is an American technologist, executive, computer programmer, leading figure in the open source software movement. He was a primary developer of the Apache web server, the most popular web server software on the internet, and a founding member of the Apache group, which later on became the Apache Software Foundation. Brian also served as the president of the foundation for 3 years. He has served on the board of Mozilla Foundation since 2003 and the Electronic Frontier Foundation since 2013. So firstly, a huge welcome to you, Brian. Thank you for joining us today.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for hosting me and hosting Hyperledger here at the World Blockchain Summit. It's pretty exciting. I wish I could travel now to be physically close to people because I get so much out of conferences. But I thought I'd give you a bit of an update today on cross-industry blockchain technologies, really what we're building at Hyperledger. So give you kind of an update just on where we're at now that we're 4 years into this crazy journey, and talk in particular about one domain that we focus on, which is actually digital identity, but as a way to just give you a sense for how all of that is emerging. So let me start sharing my slides here. Give me 1 second here to make sure this works. I'm going to presume you can see my slides. So thank you very much. First off, for anyone who isn't familiar, Hyperledger is an initiative hosted at the Linux Foundation, focused on pulling together companies and developers to build foundational technologies for blockchain networks and blockchain applications, and really focusing on the enterprise side of the blockchain space. You know, the application of this to supply chain traceability, or to trade finance, or to digital identity. You know, applications where there's still a need to track assets, there's still a need to have a common system of record. I was really inspired by Don Tapscott's book. I was really happy to see him giving the keynote earlier today. His book really helped frame for me a lot of the value that could be had in the community. And also, though, I think there's a realization that there's a way to get there with speculative financial investments like cryptocurrencies, but also a way to solve these issues and problems using other techniques. And so that's really what Hyperledger is about. And as I mentioned, we're part of the Linux Foundation. And the Linux Foundation has been around now for about 17, 18 years. It is over 300 different initiatives in all sorts of different domains, in cloud computing, in software-defined networking, these kind of low-level structural kinds of domains, but also starting to get up into fields like the energy sector. So there's something called LF Energy, which is all about software for running electricity grids, as well as the film industry has a project around software for making special effects for movies. So some really interesting stuff going on. And in all of these projects, there's this common principle that the software being built needs to serve a commercial purpose. It has to be something that organizations can incorporate and adopt into their products and services and build a sustainable value chain around, so that they can feed that value back into the open source community itself. Hyperledger itself has been around for just over 4 years. We launched publicly actually December 2015, but the first code was released in February of 2016. In that time, we've grown to 16 different technology projects that cover really the gamut of how you would build these different technologies, as well as a lot of libraries and tools, and I'll show you those in a bit. 3 of them are 1.0 and later production releases. So these are, some of these are very stable platforms you can build upon. Hyperledger Fabric in particular is the one most widely deployed, but there are other options to consider. But some of them are also very young and still somewhat experimental. And we view our job as being, put these technologies on a conveyor belt from a good idea and collaborative community building code that seems to work to something that enterprises can use and trust. We have a whole lot of active kind of community groups and special interest groups, meetup communities that we work with worldwide that reach tens of thousands and more individuals out there who've engaged in some way or another in the Hyperledger community. And one way we measure kind of our footprint is by the number of corporate organizations who are members of Hyperledger. It's their dues that fund the ongoing core operations, but really, it's at the heart of the technology is the software that gets built, and the funding just goes to pay for the salary of a small staff that acts as a kind of a central nervous system, if you will, or air traffic control for the larger community. The heart and soul of the project of Hyperledger are the 16 different technology initiatives within Hyperledger, each of them with their own name, each of them with their own cute little brand, as well as something we call Hyperledger Labs, which is kind of an incubator for new ideas and for smaller projects that might grow in stature. But every one of these projects has a couple of things in common. They all share the same set of tooling for how they're built, using the tooling that is familiar to any open source developer, but also tooling to go out and promote the technologies being built. Common IP frameworks so that corporations don't have to worry about the provenance of where the code came from. Lots of standard processes around security auditing, and when there's been security holes, getting those reported and flushed through and updates issued, all the kinds of things that enterprises really depend upon. But none of this works without the volunteer developers. Now, I say volunteer, some of these are coming from companies who are paying them to work on this code. This is not an act of charity. This is not selflessness. These are developers who, by and large, are building blockchain networks and blockchain applications and need something underneath to be able to piece these to make this all work. And so they view coordinating their efforts collaboratively as the way to move faster and further than they would if they were working independently or buying a commercial blockchain platform off the shelf. And then finally, at the Linux Foundation, as I mentioned, it's this kind of air traffic control role that we play in really helping make these things work. Myself as an executive director, a number of folks on the technical staff to make sure the tooling works, a number of folks on kind of the business development and marketing side, but really the heavy lifting and all the support and all the commercialization of this code happens through our community. And we just want to be an amplifier for their efforts. That's how you get that value circle to really move forward. And this has really paid off. Forbes runs a yearly survey called the Forbes Blockchain 50 that is used to see what are 50 companies north of $1 billion in revenue a year doing with blockchain technology for the enterprise. And more than half of them actually are using Hyperledger technologies that they build upon, and it's kind of evenly spread across many of our different platforms, Fabric and Sawtooth and Indy in particular, and that compares very favorably to some of the other platforms that are being used out there. But we don't view this necessarily as a zero-sum game competition. Most corporations are going to be using more than one blockchain technology. We just like to be the place where a lot of those get integrated together and where there's an opportunity to combine competing efforts into a collaborative effort. We'd like to be helpful with that. Some of the companies that were tracked in the Forbes Blockchain 50 as heavy users of Hyperledger include companies ranging from Amazon and IBM, as you'd expect, and Microsoft. Of course, they all three of them offer cloud computing services now around Fabric and other Hyperledger technologies, to companies based far outside of the United States, Baidu and China Construction Bank, and HSBC and ING Bank, as well as companies in domains you might not have expected, like Dole or Anthem. And these are all really interesting companies using it for a wide range of purposes. But these companies don't tend to pick up a lot of open source software off of GitHub without, they tend not to be early adopters of a lot of this technology. They tend to look for the stuff that's built with enough rigor and enough predictability and enough care towards quality and a sense of community dynamic as well. And very importantly, vendor optionality, so that they know they can invest into a technology that's really essentially a standardized technology and not have to worry about, a rip and replace if they want to change their vendor. I'll walk you very quickly through a couple of examples. One of them is a company called, a small little company called Honeywell, which is actually a rather large, very long-term company, a very old company, and who have built a marketplace for used airplane parts using Hyperledger technology, using Fabric in particular. There's a write-up on that covers quite a bit of like the how they did it and why, and a video, an interview with Lisa Butters by Michael Del Castillo from Forbes that you're welcome to watch. Another company that's more of a startup company called Chainyard, who worked with IBM to build something called the Trust Your Supplier Network, which was a way in supply chains. Often you really want to know what's the history of the party that I'm doing business with on the other side of the chain. Are they do they have a reputation for delivering on time? I have other people worked with them and all that. And this is incredibly important in the context of things like sourcing PPEs from Asia to the United States, or even things like food, the quality of food, right? So that's a network that actually has grown incredibly quickly. They see a lot of cost savings by companies adopting that technology and jumping on board. And it is a blockchain system. That database, that network is federated out across a very large number of companies and a very large number of systems. And it's enough to bring integrity and trust to that process as compared to centralizing that and having to trust just Chainyard or just trust one company. Instead, Chainyard built this, but also built the ecosystem around it, very much like Honeywell did as well. But I want to dive in particular into this field of digital identity. And there's a lot to talk about this. Obviously, it's a very wide-ranging concept, but there's a concept that's really taken hold called self-sovereign identity. Sometimes it's called user-centric identity. And to quickly kind of give you a sense of how this is different, identity in the real world, the way it works with us is when you, graduate from college, you get a diploma. When you register for a driver's license, you get a physical driver's license. And if you ever need to, you can present those physical things, right, to a bar. If you want to go drink at a bar, you can present your diploma. If you're ever challenged, did you actually graduate? All of these things become digital records that are within our agency, within our control. We as the holders hold this and present this as proofs to a verifier. But today in the digital world, those roles are reversed. I, as the holder, have to log in to somebody like Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn, and then through them log in or make proofs to somebody else, essentially trusting that issuer of those credentials, they have all the keys to the kingdom. And, if there's an error in their database, if they happen to accidentally drop me from that, if they make a change that I disagree with, they kind of have all of the keys of the kingdom, so to speak. And that's really not an empowering place to be. That's not a safe place to be. It's not a place that works across international borders. If I was trying to travel from one country to another, it wouldn't, I wouldn't, logging into one country system to present my credentials to another is kind of a lot of overhead. Where we're heading with self-sovereign ID is very much like where we are in the physical world, where the holder is the pivot point. The holder is the one who takes credentials from issuers and presents them to parties they want to log in, they want to get some services from, and where that trust relationship between the verifier and the issuer is proxied through the holder. And this is a big deal. And if you want to use if you want to map this to a concept, a real world use case from that's emerging now in COVID-19, there are a lot of folks who are talking about requiring vaccination records to be able to travel from one country to another when we have COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 vaccines available, just like we used to have to prove we had vaccines against hepatitis and dengue fever and others to be able to travel to certain countries, right? So in the real world, it would work again with me as the pivot point, right? In the digital world, a lot of the proposals that are emerging to do this put the health clinic or the central national health record in this very sensitive position right in the middle of that holding, one that creates a lot of strain and a lot of uncertainty about exactly how that should work, and potentially a lot of power in the hands of that government to not only revoke that, but potentially deny me for reasons that aren't very visible to me, aren't very transparent. And of course, if I have two passports or if I have some complication, this is a system that really doesn't allow for much flexibility. Where we would move to with self-sovereign identity is one where you hold a wallet, very much like a cryptocurrency wallet. That wallet would contain the issuances from, say, the clinic you got tested at, that, hey, or received a vaccine at, hey, I've been vaccinated, away we're ready to go. And then you present that at the border when you're ready to cross a border. And such a system is much more likely to be robust against all sorts of attacks, much more likely to be privacy preserving as well, and be very flexible out there in the real world. And this all uses a blockchain by anchoring into a blockchain of some sort. It could be a public blockchain, it could be a permission blockchain somewhere, both the proof of the claim and the public keys of the issuers of those credentials, the public keys and the credential holder, right? And then the verifier is able to read whether those claims are valid, right? And verify that integrity, much like the way things used to work with PGP and PGP key servers, right? And so a blockchain is essential in this because it gives us that extra layer of insulation so that the verifier and the issuer don't have to talk to each other. And in fact, the issuer might not even know where I present that credential, which is a key way to fight this pervasive surveillance environment that sometimes we find ourselves in. Hyperledger technologies are pervasive in this landscape that's emerging. 3 of our projects, Hyperledger Indy, Hyperledger Aries, and Hyperledger Ursa, form basically the cryptographic and library kind of foundation for how this all works. So not enough time to go into depth on this, but if you're interested in learning more, we actually have a lot of educational content we put around this. And there's another complementary foundation, also part of the Linux Foundation, that has emerged to really go in and help build out this picture of how these technologies are to be used and layered together through different governance models to actually go and achieve something like a vaccination issuer and verifier type of ecosystem, right? In fact, Trust over IP has, as part of their founding white paper, this birthday cake, as they call it, this 4-layer stack of technologies and governance organizations that correspond to those different layers to help set the standards for what takes us all the way from the bottom utility kind of layer, you know, the blockchains that we might use to store some of this information, but and proofs and things, certainly not the original identity information, but just enough to be able to prove the integrity of these documents, all the way from that utility layer, all the way up to the end user application. And there are a couple of deployments that are pretty exciting in this domain that are really worth taking a look at. One is by the government of British Columbia, the province of British Columbia in Canada, that has been using this to create self-sovereign identity records and transactions for small business owners in the British Columbia. They have a project called the Org Book, which is a way of basically creating a small business directory, but one where the keys to all those identities are held by the business owners, and where the business owner becomes the pivot point for all their engagements with different permitting offices and tax offices and other parts of government at all different layers that they have to work with. Another really exciting deployment is by a for-profit small microfinance organization called Kiva that has developed, taken this technology and developed something called the Kiva protocol that they're using and working with the government of Sierra Leone to issue digital identities, privacy-preserving, self-sovereign digital identities for every citizen in the government of Sierra Leone as a path to implementing a self-sovereign credit history system so that the cost of lending in Sierra Leone can come down. Those people who are able to pay their loans on time are able to then borrow at lower rates, all the kinds of things that we kind of take for granted in the developed world. And this is exciting because these kinds of KYC processes are tremendous leaks of information and privacy vulnerable types of applications. And so it's really cool to see these 2 applications. And there's a lot more that are emerging underway. So this was just intended to be a really quick dive. I know we don't have a lot of time. I'm not even sure there'll be time for Q&A here, but I really just appreciate what the World Blockchain Summit is bringing together. I'm going to stop sharing if I can. I'm not sure. Oh, there we go. I'm happy to try to take some questions. I'm not sure we actually have time, but it looks like time is up. Please feel free to get in touch if there's anything more I can answer for you on Hyperledger. And once again, thank you to the World Blockchain Summit.
Thank you so much, Brian, for joining us today on the World Blockchain Summit. It was incredible having you. Thank you once again.